Gonna try and do this in one take. Sorry, guys. Long time, no see. Chorn here. Lots been going on in the last month since the rules were released. I've been relatively MIA as I deal with this, and I've been having a harder time dealing with it than I initially thought. Not because I don't like change. I'd like to reiterate to everyone that I've literally been working on rule changes for the last 6 months. And I think that there needs to be a change, but I think it's important that we pick the right one and how we do it. But I've been obsessed with the process that all this went through in order and how we got to the rule release on February 4th and the confusion that happened on that day and since going forward, and the lack of answers that we have in a lot of departments like college round net, women's round net, the future of competitive play. Things that I find very important and I don't want to see fall by the wayside, and unfortunately I feel like they are. So if you guys don't know, I'm on the SRA board, so I was a part of putting these rules together, albeit not as much a part as I would have liked to be, and that's what we'll get into. I just want to say up front that I don't speak for the entire SRA board here. I'm speaking on my own. I also like to say I don't speak for any of the other groups that I am affiliated with, namely the DCC or the Players Union. I do work for them, and I hope that they take action on this, and I look forward to being a part of that action. But I do not speak for them, but I have and will continue to share my opinions with them, and I will be focused on trying to implement change in the community in better ways going forward. That's a role that I feel very passionately about at the end of this time that I've taken to reflect on how everything happened. On February 4th, the rules were released. This wound up coming as a shock to me, and I think to everybody else. So even though I was a board member, I was shocked by this. But the 800 comments that were on that post, plus the dozens of other ones that followed in its wake, I think show that the rollout of this was not very good. It wasn't super well thought out, and it left people with more questions than answers, despite the fact that the reason why this went forward this way was to provide answers. At least that's how I've been told. So I said on that day that I was going to make a statement in the coming days. I just wanted to think on it. I didn't want this to come from a place of anger. I wanted to just, sleep on it and ultimately share my opinion in a more constructive way and work towards a solution and not just complaining. I spent countless hours drafting a bunch of different versions of this, and I wound up not really liking any of them. So I'm choosing to do to share it with you this way, and what I'm going to do is share what I wrote to the board a couple of days after. It kind of describes how everything happened, and I'll interject with some context along the way as I feel necessary. I just want to say in general that this isn't meant to attack the SRA board. I think transparency is what was lacking in all of this, and I think that people wanted answers and they didn't get them. I think that a lot of people don't understand how the board works, and admittedly that makes sense because we really haven't told you. So I'm going to let you in a little bit there. My goal is not to share any board sensitive information here. I've been accused of doing that, and I'm sorry if that happened. We don't have specific guidelines on what we're allowed to share and what we're not. I don't feel like I've done anything that I haven't done in years past when I've shared my own disagreements with rules with the community. I've always shared my own votes, but I've never shared the votes of anybody else, and I haven't, and I don't intend to start now. So I've redacted names from this and spoken in a little more generalness, with just putting board members in or leadership in, so that the context is there, and you'll be able to understand what happened, but without me specifically calling out people. And again, at the end of this, I'd like to propose some actual solutions to this, because I don't think it's enough to just complain without actually offering a solution. I think that's kind of what got us into this mess, was the fact that we complained for so long that we needed rule changes, and we got them, but they weren't thought out, and they weren't the solution that I think we all wanted them to be. So stick around to the end. I'll share all that with you. But in the meantime, I'd like to share what I wrote to the SRA board with all of you. So I wrote this in the days immediately following this. I think I posted it on the 7th. The rules came out on the 4th. As you all know, I'm upset about how the 2021 rule changes were made and released to the community this year. I'd like to start by admitting that I'm not a fan of the no-hit zone, and I don't think it's the best change to push our sport forward. But that is not the reason I am writing this. My issues are not with the rule change itself. My concerns and frustrations lie in the process by which the rule changes were discussed, the lack of data supporting such a large change, the timeline for releasing the rules, and the lack of debate and voting on many of the rule changes. So I'd like to just interject here and say that, I've been I think for years I was more anti-change than a lot of other people. I said that the sport would catch up. In the recent months, I have certainly changed my tune on that. My work with the DCC was specifically to find a change for the sport and push it in the right direction. I still believe in more minimal changes than what has happened here. I'm certainly not a fan of the no-hit zone, but this it isn't because I hate the no-hit zone, or I think it's a bad idea, or I think it's unenforceable, or I think that it's insane that we don't know who's playing with it and who's not, that we don't have a solution for College RoundNet, which is what we're featuring on ESPN, that we have no answer for what this does to the women's game, which already struggles to get enough people signed up in it. This adds a significant barrier there. It's beyond all of that. It's the process that this went through, and the fact that I feel like the board was not utilized in the role that I understood us to have. So anyway, continue going forward. Until halfway through the second call, we gave rule changes a fair debate and took the time to discuss the best wording for each rule. So for context here, timeline would be the initial rule changes that we were going to discuss were shared with us on December 10th. We had sporadically talked throughout the year about things we'd like to see. Leadership shared that with us and on December 10th and said that this was just a draft. That was reiterated strongly throughout this. Basically, it was including everything that we had discussed and could possibly put in there. The rule changes were put in there with the idea that then we could edit or take things out. So nothing in there was set in stone. Included in there was the no-hit zone at the time, which I thought was crazy, but we had talked about it as a possible option. We said that we were getting some more data on that, and that would guide our judgment. Significant amounts of data never come. Some does, and I'll share that with you. But that was on December 10th. In mid-January was the first time that we got on a call. On that call, we discussed a lot of the rule changes that we were probably in more agreement on. Something like the volleyball style blocking rule was probably the most controversial thing that we talked about. But we decided to move forward with that. We voted on things as we went, but some of the things that we were discussing, board members were like, I would vote for that if it also addressed this. I'm a little bit concerned about that. And so we went to add some more verbiage. So specifically with the volleyball rule change, that was something that I kind of spearheaded. It's a rule change that I believed in a little bit more. So we rewrote some of the verbiage to address concerns that people had in order to make it something that would pass the board and feel good. So we had taken preliminary votes on a lot of these things, and we addressed them on the set. We go back and address them on the second call. On the second call is when we actually finally discuss the no-hit zone towards the end of the call, and we talk about a third call here. That second call happened. I guess that one was mid-January. The first one was early January. They were 2 weeks apart, and then we talk about a third call. That never happens. So that's a rough timeline. Keep that in mind as we go forward here. So until halfway through the second call, we gave rule changes a fair debate and took the time to discuss the best wording for each rule. The first call was filled with smaller rule changes that we largely agreed on, but we took our time debating the specific wording and even following up on proper wording at the start of the second call. We took preliminary votes and followed up on those votes after finalizing the wording. Then, when we got to the no-hit zone, that process did not continue. With this being such a massive rule change, it was understandable that the debate was initially about whether we should even move forward with this idea. We took a preliminary vote on whether or not to move forward with the idea and ended the call. These were the notes after the second meeting in regards to the no-hit zone. These are just board notes basically from the call. So this is just things that we've discussed. This doesn't share anyone's opinion here. So I personally feel comfortable sharing this. This is just literally what we did. We had a majority vote for implementing a no-hit zone, still deciding on how we best communicate this and if it's better to let people know the rule, and that we'll be testing this, that we'll be testing this in a tournament in February and making a determination from there. That was the testing tournament that happened at the end of February that you guys are aware of now. We also didn't reach a conclusion about whether this would affect Premier or Premier and Advanced. So, and then we had some other topics for the next meeting, like maintaining a pivot contact until the ball hits the net and observers needing to huddle to make decisions. So what you see here is that we, at the end of the call in the no-hit zone, we had not determined who this actually affects. We had not decided whether it was just Premier and Advanced, if it would only be Pro, or whatever the highest division was. That had not been established. We had addressed the fact that we had no idea what to do with women's there. We had addressed the fact that we'd have to talk about college as well, but none of those conversations happened. They were supposed to happen on a third call, the one that never happens. You also see that we were deciding on when to roll this out. It was discussed that that there was a possible plan to release the rules after some more testing was done on the no-hit zone, because that testing tournament was scheduled for the end of February. That would mean delaying the rules about another month. What that would have done was given us the opportunity to get some community feedback. We had gotten some from the Utah tournament and the Texas tournament. In my opinion, those were both overwhelmingly negative. I was in chat for all of those, and people didn't seem to really like what they see. The initial data that I think we saw from that was also not promising in terms of qualitative data and people's enjoyment. So I thought that it would be a lot better to do this after the testing tournament. We were going to further consider that on a third call. That was the plan anyway. After the second meeting, which is towards the middle of February here, or middle of January. After the second meeting, I began organizing an argument for not implementing the no-hit zone this year until we had done more testing through the DCC, as well as an argument for holding off the announcement until we had tested this in the February tournament and received positive player community feedback. We had the DCC largely set in place at this point. We had proposals. What I wanted to do was specifically focus on gathering some data about the no-hit zone, to open this up to the community and actually have a discussion about it before we threw it in the rule book and kind of shocked everybody with it, because I don't think people saw this change coming this year. That never had the chance to happen. Obviously I worked really hard on this just on the DCC with David, shouts to him, since September. And it was disappointing that while we had received a lot of support from leadership, we felt like we could have been a part of the solution to this, and we were not invited to do so. And in fact, actually, the adoption of those rules has made it very difficult to know how to move forward with the DCC, because we don't know what our base game is anymore. Anyway, moving on. My main concern was that the lack of transparency with the community would lead to strong community backlash and come across as us guessing and not leading/looking out for their competitive interests. I also wrote some language changes for the no-hit zone in the event that we voted to move forward, as well as an accompanying argument for what divisions should adopt the no-hit zone. So I had done work privately to follow up on this on a third call. That never got to be shared with the board, unfortunately, because I was still working on it and trying to put some things in place with the DCC as well at the time, to make sure that we'd be able to do it, so that if I suggested it to the board, I could realistically say that we could in fact do that. I knew that timing was important, and I wanted to move on this as soon as possible, so I wanted to put all my ducks in a row. And again, we had a third call as far as I was concerned. We had plenty of time to talk about it. I was under the impression that there would be time to discuss these options because all these concerns were outlined as incomplete in the meeting 2 notes, which specifically referenced having another meeting. You saw that above. I planned on sharing all of this in Basecamp once it was properly thought out and debating these and the final 2 concerns listed at the end of the meeting 2 notes. I had also rewritten the final wording for keeping the strong play hinder in so that we could get a final vote on that as discussed at the end of the second call. So that was one of my assignments as well at the end of the call. I felt very strongly about keeping strong play hinder in. I just wanted to add some clarifying verbiage so that it would be obvious when that occurred and when it didn't. And unfortunately, that never got to happen, and the strong play hinder was removed before any of that could be looked at any further. We had 2 weeks before the first call and the second call, or 2 weeks between the first and second call. That's just for, expectation wise. 1 week after the second call on February 3rd, so we're 1 day before the rules are released. So 1 week after the second call, leadership followed up and said they wanted to put out the rules this week or next. Included in that message was also a board member's vote to eliminate strong play hinder, despite the fact that I hadn't shared the final verbiage with the board yet. Another board member's additional verbiage to help define a back pocket / lip. Proposed verbiage to maintain a single point of contact after striking the ball until the receiver touches the ball, not until the ball hits the net. So that was how the rule was written as of February 3rd, 1 day before the rules came out. And clarification on immediately being approximately 3 seconds, which was in response to a Facebook post that happened. So proof that we do in fact pay attention to those. So when people bring up things, the board is listening. That one's a little bit less important, but as you see, 3 relatively important here, 2 very important, 1 also important. I wasn't able to respond on the 3rd, but I felt prepared to share my initial responses the next day and debate all the points at the next meeting that we would where we would vote. On February 3rd, only 4 other board members had responded at all, meaning that nearly half of the board had not shared their opinions on Basecamp. So when it comes to those 4 things here, half of the board didn't respond at all, didn't have any say in this, did not share their opinions. There was no meeting to do this on, and in Basecamp where we do our communication, where our threads are, no one's opinions were shared on those either. The next day, February 4th, the rules were released. This is why I'm frustrated. That was the entire story from December 10th to February 4th. That's what happened in there. We'll get to some of the data stuff in a minute, but I frankly think this makes it look worse. I think that's what happened. Less than an hour before the rules were released, a board member suggested notes to the observer guidelines that were never discussed, debated, or voted on. 3 of the 4 proposals that leadership asked for feedback on the day before were not responded to by half the board and were never discussed, debated, or voted on, which is, I think, the primary 3 things that the board should do: probably discuss, debate the rules, and vote on them. That didn't happen. Whether to announce the no-hit zone before or after this February test tournament and what divisions would be affected by the change were never followed up on, which is what caused the most confusion, I think, in our group in the following month. And still to this day, we don't have answers over a month later. The verbiage for the no-hit zone was never discussed beyond the preliminary vote, and the verbiage at that time included the no-hit zone also being an out-of-bounds area for the ball to land in. This is one of the biggest gripes that I actually have. When we talked about the no-hit zone on that second call, and we're going to continue debating on to the 3rd, the no-hit zone was not only a boundary for players, but it was also a boundary for the ball, meaning that you could not drop the ball inside the no-hit zone. It had to clear it. That was written out here in the notes, or in the rules, under hits on the net, illegal hits on the net. When the ball is returned to the set, the return results in a loss of point for the hitting team if the ball bounces on top of the net, then lands on or within the no-hit zone line. This is why I thought this vote was very preliminary. I brought this up, and it was defended as necessary. We were literally about to add a boundary to our sport for the first time ever, and not just for players, but for the actual ball. When I joined the board, this was something that I thought was a little bit more sacred, that it would always be 360 degrees and no boundaries. That was the selling point of our sport. I had talks with leadership about that and other people on the board. And the lack of thought that went into adding that to the rules was shocking to me, although you'll note that it did not make the final edit. Frankly, all of this is unacceptable to me. All of it. The end of this process was so rushed that half the board wasn't even consulted. Debate never happened, and votes were never held. Because we skipped this debate internally, the rollout to the community was confusing and blindsiding. The community deserved better than this. Not only did they deserve some warning for such a large rule changes, but they deserved for it to have been fully thought out and with consultation from all the community leaders on the board. The frustration was obvious in the 800 plus comments under this announcement and the dozen or so posts immediately following it, but it was felt by leadership all over the world that privately reached out in confusion, asking what I thought the odds of keeping some of these changes would be in the immediate future. So go back to February 4th and remember what it was like to read those rules and be just shocked that this was happening. I don't think anyone in the community saw this coming, and it's crazy that board members didn't see this coming either. These rule changes were implemented without a lot of our consent, without any of us debating them. So even if privately there had been secret votes or something like that, the fact that we weren't consulted is insane to me. That's why I joined the board, was to try and impact the sport in a positive way, to share my opinion. And it's what I've done for the last 3 years, and I didn't get the chance to do that. And many other board members didn't either. And frankly, I think they should be just as outraged as I am, but that's for them to decide. In terms of the fallout, leadership all over the world reached out to me privately and asked why this was happening. They were shocked that it was happening. They asked what testing went into it. They asked if they needed to adopt it. And frankly, I didn't have good answers for them. And that's very frustrating. I pride myself on trying to lead better than that, and trying to offer better guidance than that. But truly, I didn't know what to do. This was some uncharted territory for me, for sure. Continuing. We need to put better structures in place to make sure this doesn't happen again. We need to have a procedure for debating verbiage and holding votes so that it happens not just for some rule changes, but all of them. Debate from dissenting opinions can shape the rules and address concerns ahead of time instead of after disappointing community feedback. It leads to a better final product, whether or not any of us individually agree on every single rule change. Communication was severely lacking and even absent in the final days of this process, and the posting of the rules shouldn't ever come as a surprise to any of us on the board. We should work together, and that did not happen this time. I think that's ultimately the saddest part, was that we didn't work together on this. And while I also independently was working with the Players Union and the DCC on this, I always had the interest of the community at heart, and always had the intent to put the best rules out possible. I always had the intent to share our thinking with the community and get their opinions on this before we did anything rash like this. And it happened so fast that I couldn't delay that or stop it from happening. And it's still very frustrating to me. It's still incredibly frustrating that this happened. I'm still in shock over it, and I'm still incredibly disappointed. Ultimately, big decisions were unilaterally made without the knowledge or consent of board members. Another huge sticking point. With the USRA and the IRF in their infancy, the SRA board members are still the leaders in competitive round net. The work that each of the 9 of us does is important, as are our opinions, and it's a failure on this board's part that we didn't all get to participate in these major changes. Part of the discussion that frustrated me most too was that this was framed as a decision that was only to be made with the interest of the SRA season. This was only to apply to our tour, and everyone else had the choice to decide what they would do with it. It was shared with the world as that as well, but I think we all know that if the most competitive tour has these rules, this is what the most competitive players are going to want to practice, because they're going to want to win the most competitive tournaments. So I think it abdicates responsibility to say that the USRA and the IRF are left to fend for what the rules actually look like. Hypothetically, before Worlds was canceled at the time, we could have had an SRA season with a no-hit zone and Worlds without one. And that's how we would have qualified our teams, was based on that. I think that's unforgivable and unacceptable. And I think it just advocates responsibility, because at the end of the day, everyone was going to adopt this if it was put out. And I think that's why they did it the way they did, because they wanted it to happen. And it's unfortunate that that's the route that was taken. Let's continue. I was under the impression that the vote to move forward on the no-hit zone was preliminary. Before we voted, leadership asked where everyone was at right now, and the follow-up notes indicated that we were going to meet about this topic again. I also raised my concerns about the no-hit zone being a boundary for the ball on that call, and the concept of including it in the rule was defended, so it was not accidentally left in there, as was suggested to me privately. It was made clear that it was a part of the rule during that preliminary vote. So even if we wanted to take that as a vote, what the board voted in for you guys was that no-hit zone also being a boundary for the ball. So even if I'm wrong about that being a preliminary vote, that's what was voted on, and that is not what is present in the rules. That decision was unilaterally made. Follow-up notes indicated that we would discuss the rollout of the rule, possibly postponing it until after the testing tournament at the end of February, which you guys just saw now. So the possibility of getting more data and receiving more community feedback was clearly on the table. My suggestion at the time was to delay the rules until March, because we weren't realistically going to have the season start at the beginning of the year. No tournaments had been canceled at that time, but obviously considerations were being made to postpone the season a little bit in light of COVID restrictions. So I felt that we had time to do that and actually put something out in March. I would have rather put something out that was thoroughly tested, or at least shared with the community. I think that testing tournament should have been live streamed. It should have been turned into a spectacle where everyone was sharing their opinions on this, trusting the community to give feedback that would have been helpful here, and that did not happen. So I was disappointed in that as well. I was disappointed to see that that was not live streamed either, and that was mostly done in private. Although I think some of the videos have now been put on YouTube, but again, a big deal's not really been made there, and I think it should be. I share my concerns that the community wanted transparency on the testing process and not a radical rule change that they weren't confident in yet, so I set out to gather some evidence to support that. I streamed all 6 of the proposed DCC rule changes and got community feedback. I engaged community members in conversations outside the Facebook group about what they would want to see and how they would like to see us move forward. I watched the Utah and Texas tournaments from start to finish and asked the communities to release some qualitative data to share their reactions. I reached out to the Players Union to say that they should probably lead on such a large community topic and discuss the amount of testing and transparency that they would want to see before a rule was competitively adopted. And this is where I get accused of sharing board secrets. I was acting on my own accord here. I think that those standards should be pretty met, or like pretty agreed upon within the community. I think there's a lot of talk about how much data you need, and I think some people think you need 10 games, and I think we need hundreds. And so I think deciding what that looks like should be a priority. And while I did some of that work with the Players Union initially, I call on them to pick that back up again and lead on this issue in light of everything going on for the future of the sport, for 2022 going forward, for everything, and for this, frankly, because this rule is provisional. So that I share my concerns about prematurely adopting radical rule changes, or prematurely adopting a radical change for the 2021 competitive season. That word radical is not mine. It was described on the board multiple times as a radical change. And I said that I was afraid that some on the board might want to, but I didn't share with anyone that this was for sure happening, nor could I have because I wasn't aware that this vote was final. I'd been sharing my stance on this privately and publicly months before on Twitch, Instagram, etc. I got more concerned on February 3rd when it seemed like we were skipping the next meeting and settling all of this in Basecamp, but I surely thought that when I was able to share my thoughts the next day, I could convince us to have another meeting to discuss everything further, because I think doing anything else would have been crazy. And I truly mean this part. If I shared something that I wasn't supposed to, I very much apologize. I had no intention of sharing anything that anyone would be uncomfortable with on the board. I truly think that the board needs to be more transparent, and I won't apologize for sharing my own thoughts. But I'm sorry if anyone feels like I violated their own privacy on this. I feel like I didn't, but if I did, I truly am sorry. I've been publicly advocating for making testing a priority for the community since September when David organized the DCC, and I continued that work on my own through our board talks, or throughout. I have publicly stated my position on rule changes and the theory behind making rule changes on my Twitch and YouTube channels. I literally have a 28-minute video outlining my philosophy on rule changes that was uploaded a month before the first draft of the rules was even shared with us. So you guys can check that out if you want. I did my best to not share direct quotes from people or discuss how anyone personally voted, and I did my best to keep what I communicated to other people from my perspective. When I joined the board, I told you all that I was excited to share my perspective as a competitive player, an athlete that wanted to shape the professional career path within our sport, and a well-integrated member of the community. Again, I'm sorry if anyone feels I violated their privacy. We don't have any formal guidelines about what we can and cannot share publicly, and I am sorry if the line I have been drawing since I joined the board was not where others expected it to be. We should certainly formalize this going forward. In regards to in-depth testing, there were multiple testing efforts made, but the result of that testing was hardly substantial. Spikehouse data did not include testing on any of the rule changes that were adopted this year, and before the votes, we were only presented with 20 games of data from two groups for the 7 foot with a lean, and only 11 games of data from two Texas groups for the no-hit zone. We only received qualitative feedback from one group on the 7 foot with a lean rule, and 50% of them thought it was a step backwards. We were repetitively told that more testing was underway, but this is all the data we were presented with at the time of the vote. After these votes, we actually got a little bit more data on, I believe, the 7 foot with a lean, but that was regardless. After the vote, Utah RoundNet shared some unpromising, that wasn't it. This is what we got afterwards. After the vote, Utah RoundNet shared some unpromising qualitative feedback from their tournament, and we never received the data from the Texas Test tournament before the rules were adopted, although community feedback from those who watched was mostly negative or undecided, pending more testing. I watched all of that. I was there. I was in chat. I was specifically looking for this stuff in mind. I took notes on things that people said, and it was overwhelmingly negative. Player feedback was not good, and the fact that we moved forward regardless was kind of crazy to me. I'd like to take a minute now to just share that data with you. This is not strictly internal data. I actually independently sourced all of this again from outside of the board. Also, all of this exists within the community and was either shared with them directly, or I went to the source that gathered it. So I don't feel like I'm sharing board secrets with this one. Let's see here. Oh, I see. I did the wrong one. So this, oh, wait a second. Let's actually do this first. So this was the 7 foot with a lean data from Baylor initially. If you look here, I'll zoom in a little bit for you guys. So here it looks like we had about 6 games worth of data. I roughly just divide by 20. That's like or divide by, no, I guess you divide by 40. Jesus. So like not a whole lot here. So yeah, even worse. It's actually worse. If you divide by 40, this is like 5 games, and this is like 5 games. So we had 10 games here of 7 foot with a lean. Oh yeah, that is how I got these numbers. So yeah, like roughly 40 points a game. So they played like 3 control games, and then they played some 7 foot with a lean. Second round, obviously we have this stuff here. What I'd like to draw your attention to is overall, how would you assess the modification? We only received data from Baylor on this. Of the 4 responses, 50% of them slightly worse than the current way of playing. The other one said about the same as the current way of playing. Do you think this will help eliminate subjectivity on regulating serves? Yes, indeed it helped. I agree. That's why we were exploring this as well. Do you think the 7 foot with a lean gave an advantage to you as a server? Most of them said no. One said it was about even. Obviously, we're seeing that this is a greater impact than we at least initially thought. Chattanooga data here. So it looks like we got about 3 games of data here. And then we've got about 5 games of data here. We did not receive any qualitative feedback from this, but you can obviously see the stats here. That was all that we saw on 7 foot with a lean. That's how that was adopted. The decision for it to be 7 feet was only that we tested it and it didn't seem to significantly change anything. So why do anything else? I personally think it should be 2 meters or 6.5. Because I think it's too far. I think it's now made serving too, it's nerfed it too far. And I think we'd just be better if we were at another one, or at least we should test it further. I guess I'll leave it there. But those are my initial thoughts. This would be the data here that we got from, so this one is, I think this one's Y-Spike. Yep. So this was some Y-Spike data out of Texas. As you see here in the exported data, we've got 6 games worth of data. You can see the data analysis here. So that was 6 games of no hit zone data. Then there's this one. This was no hit zone Houston. Bring up Houston. There we go. No hit zone Houston. You can see here. Looks like we have 5 or another 6. Looks like 6 games of data. Yeah, 6 games of variation data. So I suppose this is 12. Was the other one 6 or was it 5? Let me double check. I really feel like I had it right with 11. Oh, that's right. Yes. So the Y-Spike one only had 5, and this one has 6. Those were the 11 games of data that we were given to do the no-hit zone. In a statement following this, the board mentions the work that they did in Utah, which I, of course, applaud any work that's being done here. Testing is important, but it's important to note that none of the rule changes, 0 of them, 0 rule changes that were implemented this year were tested in Utah. This was the data that we were given on that. Right here we have some control games and a 20-inch legs, so higher net. Control games and 12-inch set, so also higher net, different height. Control games and bigger ball. See here we have 10 games of bigger ball, nearly as much as we had on no hit zone. We have 6 games of 3v3. We have 12 games of 2-man receive. That's notably been tested more than no hit zone. Big pro ball with 12-inch height. So this is both big ball and 12-inch. 5 games of data there. 12-inch pro set. There's some more. Co-ed receive, that's specifically only girls serving to girls and guys serving to guys as a practice. That had 12 games of data, also more thoroughly tested. 12 games on mini net here, which I believe was just 4 rims. So mini net, also more tested. But notably, none of that had anything to do with volleyball style blocking rule, no hit zone, 7 foot with a lean, any of that. None of that. Continuing onward. Ultimately, the vote on the no hit zone was made off 11 games of data. Now, if you find that acceptable, I guess you can move on and feel confident in this process. I don't. The fact that it was 2 groups out of Texas, which has a very specific play style, a very specific way that they even call pockets, it's insane to me that we would then say that that is going to indicate for the rest of the world. We didn't test it at other skill levels. I believe all of this was premier and maybe upper advanced included in there. But to be sure, it was not tested on other things. We had no data involving women. We had no data involving college. We had no data involving any of that. And that's why you see no decision made there. We didn't have the data to make the decision. But yet somehow this decision was made. Maybe that's more data than we've ever used in the past. I went back to look to see if Double Fault had more data than that, and I couldn't find that stuff. It had been buried, I think. I think that was a more conceptual thing. But regardless, I hardly think that's enough, given the fact that we referred to a change like this for months as radical, and the community at large hasn't been specifically asking for it. You guys have been asking for change. You guys had not specifically been asking for a no-hit zone, at least by and large. Bigger Balls 21 was on the rise. And I think more and more people were just like, just test it, invite us, let us test it. I think people would have felt more comfortable if they had already played this before. But I'd say that 99% of players, when they read this, had never attempted to hit a ball with a no-hit zone. And the fact that many people didn't know whether or not they needed to start doing that on the day it was released is, it's a strong word, but I'm going to say unforgivable. In my work with the DCC, it seems like leadership believed our purpose was to help inform the board on proposed changes, especially the radical ones, and that was never given a chance to happen. My main concern was that lack of transparency in the testing process would lead to community shock if we abruptly announced this change, and that's exactly the response we saw on Thursday. If we're so confident in the testing that we did, we should openly share that data set with the community. I shared that with the board a month ago. They have not at least outlined that very clearly. Like I said, some of this data is floating around in private, but I want to put it all here on the table so that everyone knows the amount of work that went into this. Frankly, I don't think it's enough. If this data set was enough to convince us, we should adopt this rule. Sharing it with the community should persuade the community that this was properly tested and the best way forward as well. So hopefully this colors your opinion one way or the other. Hopefully you feel, I hope you feel good about it. I frankly don't think you should. And I think even if you wind up liking the no-hit zone change, you should be saying that this should not be the way that we do things going forward and that we should test things a lot further, especially because there's a new set coming out this year that they announced, and we have no idea what that looks like. It's going to be something that we're all going to have to buy. We should probably be testing that extensively, and it should probably be very visible. That would be my suggestion here. The truth of the matter is, we're not confident that this rule change is the future of our sport. Many of us openly admit that it was likely this rule change might not make it through the entire season. We had already discussed how to hypothetically admit that we were wrong and take it out of the rules after a few tournaments, if need be. All of that was communicated on the call before the vote that I didn't think was about. Thought it was preliminary. And that's okay. We probably shouldn't be confident in it. But let's level with the community. Right now, we're feigning confidence in the no-hit zone and hoping that everyone will hop on board. We aren't leading on the international community front by saying that we don't make the rules for them, despite the fact that we're still effectively the leaders on this while the IRF is still in its infancy. We aren't exhibiting good leadership on the issue, and we aren't giving the community enough credit when we keep our processes from them. The board and the community could finally get on the same page if we admitted that neither party knows the way forward, even if we're hopeful, but we agree that we can get there with a collaborative, organized testing effort that we openly discuss throughout. That will certainly already, sorry, let's try that again. The board and the community could finally get on the same page if we admitted that neither party knows the way forward, even if we are hopeful. But we all agree that we can get there with a collaborative, organizing, testing effort that we openly discuss throughout what will likely already be an abbreviated 2021 season. In light of how this rollout went, it seems like a good idea to take a step back and reevaluate, especially because we are likely not starting the tour in April anymore. Since then, obviously, we've postponed or at least rescheduled some of the tournaments. So the first one is now scheduled for May 22nd. As of recording now, that gives us 2.5 months in order to decide whether or not this is a good rule change. The board has expressed that they are open to rescinding this rule if it's not the will of the community. Frankly, I think that everyone, whether you like it or not, should demand more testing on this before we introduce this to the highest level of competition. Frankly, I find it insulting that at the highest level of competition, we're being asked to test rules that we could have done independently ourselves, but we chose not to. I find it insulting that we might put in a lot of hard work in order to train for a season, and then this rule gets taken out. I find it insulting that we'd be asked to do that competitively and not have been trusted to do this privately, or rather publicly, but just away from the biggest stage in RoundNet. Right now, if ESPN called and said, we want to show some more RoundNet, we want to cover a college tournament, we want to cover one of the tour stops this year, we don't know what that product is going to look like. We'd be showing them this, and it might get taken out. Sports don't do that, especially grassroots ones like ours. We test this at other independent events. We test this theoretically within the community first, and we see what community feedback is before adopting something like this. We skipped over all of that. And admittedly, I think it came from a good place. I think the board wanted to lead confidently on this. They wanted to say, we're confident that this is the future and you should be too. But that confidence, in my opinion, is feigned. It's not, we can't know that this is the way forward. And not in the way that we can't know anything about this or that it's all opinion. We can't know because we literally didn't try. We didn't try hard enough anyway. To me, this is an unacceptable amount of work that was put in, and I sincerely hope that we do better in the future. I sincerely hope that we reevaluate what to do going forward with this. I hope we test the 2021 rules with and without the no-hit zone for now as we look towards 2022, which is going to have a new set and where possibilities open up in order to make other changes to the set that might give us the results that we actually want, that might give us something closer to the game that we all grew up actually playing. Some people say that the no-hit zone gets us closer to that because there's more rallies. I think in general, the skills that we worked on are now effectively a lot more useless. I think we fell in love with the creative hitting aspect of the game, and I think that's been eliminated. Frankly, I think I would do very well with this rule change because now hitting the ball very hard is now a very good strategy. But it's unexciting to me. I've said for years that I'm not the most exciting player on the scene. I've said for years that if everyone else played the sport like I did, it wouldn't be nearly as watchable. When I get excited about plays, it's someone doing something very creatively. And those opportunities are just missing now from the sport, in my opinion. I think this is an inelegant solution. It was the only thing that could be done now in terms of a big change. And I think the board was afraid to not move forward. As humans, when we're posed with a big decision, we often feel like taking no action is the wrong one. But frankly, with this already being a weird year, we easily could have just made this a year of privately testing, being excited to come together and finally play the sport that we hadn't been able to play for an entire year previously, at least on the big stage. And we could have looked forward to 2022 with a new set and other opportunities to get the change right, to be able to vet everything, to have been able to have vetted bigger ball, to have been able to have vetted a lippier set, to have been able to have vetted maybe some sort of mechanism that eliminated pockets or at least minimized them better by like tightening the set in a different way. But now we're in a weird situation where we don't know what to do. I personally think that those options are far more elegant going forward, and I hope that the no-hit zone is at least eliminated in 2022. Frankly, I hope it's eliminated far sooner than that, and I don't think it belongs on the highest stage. I don't think we should be testing there. I think that should be the game that we're a lot more confident in. And I think that it would have been better to lead by inviting all of you into the process instead of keeping you out of it. Again, I'd like to say that I don't speak for the board when I say these things. I'd like to say I don't speak for the DCC. Again, I'd like to say that I don't speak for the Players Union, but I do look forward to working with those organizations in the future to right this wrong, to figure out how to move forward in the best way possible, and to make RoundNet the best sport. I also look forward to creating more opportunities for transparency, to invite you guys in, to have you guys be a part of the testing process. Please sign up to do some work with the DCC. We're in the process of figuring out how we want to move forward and what testing we want to do this year. We'd also love your opinions on that, so please share that with us. You can go in the Facebook group and share your opinions there. We're always reading. You can reach out to us individually. Please do. I encourage all of you to reach out to me privately as well if you want to know more on this. And in the meantime, I am uploading this today, March 10th, 2021, Wednesday. On Thursday, March 11th at 7 p.m. Central Time, I will go live on Twitch, twitch.tv/Seahorn-Spikes, or you can click the link down below. And I'll answer any questions that you guys have on this situation or where to go forward. I will say that I'm a little bit worried about the backlash from this. Not really from the community, because I feel like you guys are, I at least hope that you'll appreciate the fact that I let you in on this. But I think this is something that's worth saying. I don't think that I can hold my tongue here. And I don't think that it would be in the best interest of our sport or our community to do so. I trust you guys. I think that you guys should be let in on the process more than we have currently let you in. And just to reiterate, I'm not just disappointed in everyone else on the board. I'm disappointed in the entirety of the board, and that does include me. So in my opinion, so to me, I'm sorry that we let you down. I hope to right that wrong. I hope that the IRF and USA RoundNet gain a little bit more power and influence so that we can separate more from the company. I know that the company doesn't want to be the ones making the rules for this anyway. They really want to be the ones who are leading in distributing the product. That's kind of on the goals, at least for the USRA for the next 5 years, is to be the ones who are doing this. But in the meantime, this is who we have, and the process needs to be better. I open you guys up to, or I'll ask you guys to share your opinions on how to right this wrong. Be vocal on this. And to everyone who vocally has been upset with the no-hit zone but feels like they have to go along with it, or they have to start training it, or they don't want to complain even more, it doesn't help to not say what's on your mind. We got here by not knowing what you guys were thinking, and I think it's important that going forward, we know where people are at. So share your opinions on this, please. Share your opinions with me, share your opinions with the board, share your opinions with leadership, and organize around this. This doesn't have to be a devastating blow to the community, although I do think that it is a blow. I think we can rebound from this stronger. I think that any mistake is only as bad as what you don't learn from it. And I think what we've learned going forward is that we have to do things differently, that we have to be more transparent, that we have to think longer term, and that we can't discount the opinions of everyone else. And we can't act unilaterally without the consent of the people that have been entrusted to try and make this process better. So that's all I have to share with you. Again, I'll see you guys tomorrow at 7 p.m., March 11th, Central Time, on Twitch to answer any questions that you guys have surrounding this so that I can add some clarification. I'm sorry this was so long, but hopefully it's worth your time. Thank you.